The sun beat down on the dusty plains of West Texas, baking the earth to a crisp. A lone hawk circled lazily overhead, its keen eyes scanning the endless expanse of scrub brush and rocky hills. This was Thaddeus Bear, Mallister's domain. Not that he owned it, not in the way the land office back in Austin thought about ownership. But he belonged to it, and it belonged to him. Bear was a man carved from the very landscape he inhabited, weathered, strong, and silent. His face, etched with lines earned from years under the harsh sun, spoke of resilience and a quiet determination. He wasn't a talker. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. His ranch, a modest collection of sturdy log buildings, was a testament to his hard work and self-sufficiency. He raised cattle, mostly, and a few horses, enough to keep him fed and clothed, enough to make a life for himself. It was a solitary existence, but Bear didn't mind. He found solace in the rhythm of the land, in the predictable cycle of seasons. Bear had come to Texas seeking something he couldn't name, but he knew he'd found it here in the vast emptiness. A sense of peace, perhaps, or maybe just a place where he could be himself, away from the noise and expectations of the world back east. He was a man of routine, up before dawn, tending to the animals, mending fences, and riding the range. He knew every inch of his land, every arroyo, and every watering hole. He knew where the deer liked to graze and where the coyotes howled at night. He was also a man of his word. If he said he would do something, he did it, no matter the cost. It was a simple code, but it was the foundation upon which he built his life. The land, though beautiful, could be unforgiving. Droughts were common, and the threat of raids from the Comanche was ever present. The settlers and the Comanche were locked in a constant struggle for control of the land, a conflict fueled by misunderstanding and mistrust. Bear, though wary of the Comanche, held no animosity towards them. He understood they were fighting for their way of life, just as he was. He respected their skill as warriors and their deep connection to the land. One sweltering afternoon, as Bear was riding back to his ranch after a long day of checking fences, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A small, dark shape huddled beneath a scraggly mesquite tree. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. As he drew closer, he realized it was a child, a young girl, and she was clearly in distress. Bear dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He approached the girl cautiously, his hand resting on the handle of his revolver. Not out of malice, but out of prudence. He didn't know who she was or what dangers might be lurking nearby. "Hello there, little one," he said softly, his voice raspy from years of shouting over the wind. "Are you all right?" The girl didn't respond. She just huddled tighter beneath the mesquite tree, her eyes wide with fear. Her clothes were ragged and torn, and her face was streaked with dirt. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't eaten or slept in days. Bear knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. He could see now that she was Comanche, or at least she was dressed in the style of the Comanche. That made the situation even more complicated. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice still gentle. "I just want to help." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen of water. He offered it to her, but she didn't take it. He left it on the ground nearby. "Water," he said, pointing to the canteen. "For you." He waited patiently, giving her time to decide. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the girl reached out a tentative hand and grabbed the canteen. She drank greedily, spilling water down her chin. Bear watched her, his heart aching with sympathy. He knew what it was like to be hungry and alone. He'd been there himself, many years ago. When she finished drinking, she looked up at him, her eyes still filled with fear, but with a hint of gratitude as well. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're welcome," Bear replied. "What's your name?" "I am Nahima," she said. "Nahima," Bear repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "That's a pretty name." "My name is Bear." Nahima looked at him curiously. "Bear." "It's what people call me," he said with a shrug. "I am called Thaddeus, but everyone calls me Bear." He knew he couldn't just leave her there. She wouldn't survive the night. But taking her back to his ranch was a risk. It could bring trouble down on his head, not only from the other settlers, but but from the Comanche as well. But he couldn't turn his back on a child in need. It wasn't in his nature. He made his decision. "Nahima," he said, "are you hungry?" She nodded, her eyes wide. "I have a ranch nearby," Bear said. "I will take you there. We can get you some food and a place to rest." He held out his hand to her. Nahima hesitated for a moment, then took it. Bear helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, but she managed to stand. He led her to his horse and helped her to climb up behind the saddle. Then he mounted in front of her, taking care not to jostle her too much. "Hold on tight," he said. "We're going home." The ride back to the ranch was slow and uneventful. Nahima, exhausted, leaned against Bear's back, her small body trembling slightly. He could feel her ribs through her thin clothes, a stark reminder of her weakened state. As they approached the ranch, Bear scanned the surroundings, his senses on high alert. He knew that bringing a Comanche girl onto his property was a dangerous proposition, and he wanted to be prepared for any trouble that might arise. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air was cooler now, and the scent of sagebrush filled the air. The ranch dogs, a motley collection of hounds and mutts, began to bark as they approached, their tails wagging excitedly. Bear reined in his horse in front of the main house, a sturdy log cabin with a wide porch. He dismounted and then carefully lifted Nahima down from the horse. "Easy now," he said gently. "We're here." He led her into the cabin, which was sparsely furnished but clean and tidy. A fire was burning in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "Make yourself comfortable," Bear said, gesturing to a rocking chair near the fire. "I'll get you something to eat." He went to the pantry and rummaged through the shelves, finding a can of beans, some dried beef, and a loaf of bread. He heated up the beans over the fire and then set the food on a wooden table. "Eat," he said, pushing the food towards Nahima. "Eat as much as you want." Nahima looked at the food hesitantly, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then she began to eat, slowly at first, and then with increasing enthusiasm. Bear watched her, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. It felt good to help someone in need. It reminded him that even in this harsh and unforgiving land, there was still room for kindness and compassion. After Nahima had finished eating, Bear showed her to a small room in the back of the cabin. There was a bed in the room, covered with a patchwork quilt. "You can sleep here," Bear said. "Get some rest. You need it." Nahima looked at him gratefully. "Thank you, Bear," she said. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome, Nahima," Bear replied. "Just get some sleep." He left the room and closed the door behind him. He knew that he had a lot to think about. He had taken a big risk bringing Nahima back to his ranch, and he didn't know what the future held. But he knew that he had done the right thing. He had helped someone in need, and that was all that mattered. Bear spent a restless night, tossing and turning in his bed. He kept thinking about Nahima, wondering how she was doing and what had happened to her. He also worried about the potential consequences of his actions. He knew that some of his neighbors wouldn't approve of him sheltering a Comanche girl. They might even accuse him of being a traitor. But he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. He had done what he thought was right, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Bear woke up early and went to check on Nahima. He found her sleeping soundly in the small room, her face peaceful and relaxed. He smiled, relieved that she was finally getting some rest. He went outside and started a fire in the cook stove. He made some coffee and cooked up some bacon and eggs. He figured Nahima would be hungry when she woke up. As he was cooking, he heard the sound of horses approaching the ranch. He tensed up, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. He peered out the window and saw a group of riders coming toward the house. They were Comanche. Bear's heart sank. He knew that this was the moment he had been dreading. He had to face the consequences of his actions. He took a deep breath and walked out onto the porch, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hold your horses," he shouted. "I mean you no harm." The Comanche riders reined in their horses a short distance from the house. They were a formidable-looking group, their faces painted with war paint, their eyes hard and unforgiving. The leader of the group, a tall, muscular man with a stern expression, dismounted from his horse and walked towards Bear. He was dressed in elaborate buckskin clothing, adorned with feathers and beads. Bear recognized him immediately. It was Chief White Bull, the leader of the local Comanche tribe. "You are Thaddeus Mallister?" White Bull asked, his voice deep and resonant. "I am," Bear replied. "Where is my daughter?" White Bull demanded, his eyes blazing with anger. Bear swallowed hard. He knew that his life was on the line. "She is here," he said, gesturing towards the cabin. "She is safe." White Bull's eyes narrowed. "Why have you taken her?" "I found her lost and starving on my land," Bear explained. "I took her in to help her." White Bull stared at Bear for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "I want to see her," he said. Bear nodded. "Of course," he said. "Come inside." He led White Bull into the cabin, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew that he had to be brave. He had to stand up for what he believed in. He had to protect Nehima. Bear led White Bull through the main room and towards the small bedroom where Nehima was still sleeping. He paused at the door, glancing back at the chief. "She's still asleep?" he whispered. "I don't want to startle her." White Bull nodded, his expression softening slightly. He seemed genuinely concerned for his daughter's well-being. Bear gently pushed open the door and stepped inside. Nehima was still sleeping soundly, her face buried in the pillow. He approached the bed and gently shook her shoulder. "Nehima," he said softly, "wake up. You have a visitor." Nehima stirred and slowly opened her eyes. She looked around the room, confused. Then she saw White Bull standing in the doorway. Her eyes widened with surprise and joy. "Father!" she exclaimed. She jumped out of bed and ran towards him, throwing her arms around his neck. White Bull embraced her tightly, burying his face in her hair. Bear watched them, a lump forming in his throat. It was a touching scene, and he felt a sense of relief that everything was going to be all right. After a few moments, White Bull released Nehima and stepped back, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Are you all right, my daughter?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Were you harmed?" Nehima shook her head. "I'm fine, Father," she said. "Bear took care of me. He saved my life." White Bull turned to Bear, his expression unreadable. "Is this true?" he asked. "It is," Bear replied. "I found her lost and starving. I gave her food and shelter." White Bull stared at Bear for a long moment, his eyes searching his soul. Then he nodded slowly. "I thank you, Thaddeus Mallister," he said. "You have done a great service to my family." Bear was relieved. He had expected White Bull to be angry and vengeful, but instead, he was grateful. "It was nothing," Bear said. "I did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have done what you did," White Bull said. "There are many who would have left my daughter to die." He paused, then continued. "I owe you a debt, Thaddeus Mallister. I will not forget it." He turned back to Nehima and took her hand. "Come, my daughter," he said. "We're going home." Nehima looked at Bear, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Goodbye, Bear," she said. "Thank you for everything." "Goodbye, Nehima," Bear replied. "Take care of yourself." White Bull led Nehima out of the cabin and towards their horses. The other Comanche warriors watched them, their expressions still wary. As White Bull mounted his horse, he turned back to Bear. "I will not forget your kindness, Thaddeus Mallister," he said. "If you ever need anything, you can come to me." Then he turned his horse and rode away, followed by Nehima and the other warriors. Bear watched them go, a sense of peace settling over him. He had faced a difficult situation, and he had come through it with his integrity intact. He had shown kindness and compassion, even to someone who was considered his enemy. And in doing so, he had made a friend. The departure of White Bull and his warriors left a strange quiet in its wake. The ranch dogs, sensing the tension was gone, resumed their usual lazy lounging in the sun. Bear, however, felt a shift in the air, a subtle change that he couldn't quite put his finger on. He went back inside the cabin, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. He thought about what had just happened, about the risk he had taken, and about the unexpected outcome. He had expected anger and violence, but he had found gratitude and respect. He knew that this encounter would change things. It would change the way he was perceived by the other settlers, and it would change the way he interacted with the Comanche. He had crossed a line that separated the settlers from the natives, and he had emerged on the other side. Days turned into weeks, and life at the ranch slowly returned to normal. Bear continued his daily routine, tending to his cattle, mending fences, and riding the range. But he was no longer quite as solitary as he had been before. He found himself thinking about Nahima and White Bull, wondering how they were doing. One afternoon, as he was riding along the creek, he saw something in the distance. It was a group of Comanche warriors. He tensed up, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. But then he recognized one of the riders. It was a young warrior he had seen with White Bull at the ranch. The warrior saw him too and waved his hand in greeting. Bear hesitated for a moment, then waved back. The warrior rode towards him, followed by the other members of the group. "Hello, Thaddeus Mallister," the warrior said, his voice friendly. "My name is Chayton." "Hello, Chayton," Bear replied. "What brings you here?" "We are hunting," Chayton said. "We saw your cattle, and we wanted to ask if we could hunt on your land." Bear considered the request for a moment. He had never allowed the Comanche to hunt on his land before. But he remembered White Bull's words, "If you ever need anything, you can come to me." "You are welcome to hunt on my land," Bear said. "But I ask that you respect my property and do not harm my cattle." Chayton smiled. "We will respect your property," he said. "We only need enough to feed our families." Bear nodded. "Then you are welcome," he said. Chayton thanked him and then turned to leave. As he was riding away, he paused and looked back at Bear. "White Bull sends his greetings," he said. "He says that he will not forget your kindness." Bear smiled. "Tell him I said hello," he replied. Chayton nodded and then rode away, disappearing into the distance. Bear watched them go, feeling a sense of hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, it was possible for the settlers and the Comanche to live together in peace. Maybe kindness and understanding could bridge the divide that separated them. It would not be easy, but not impossible. The seeds were planted. Now to see if they would grow. He continued his ride, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the land. The air was filled with the scent of sagebrush and the sound of birds singing. It was a beautiful world, and Bear was grateful to be a part of it. Word of Bear's encounter with White Bull and the Comanche spread quickly through the small settlements and ranches of the area. Some praised him for his bravery and compassion, while others condemned him for his foolishness and treachery. Many of the settlers believed that all Comanche were savages and that any interaction with them was dangerous. They accused Bear of siding with the enemy and warned him that he was putting himself and everyone else at risk. Bear listened to their concerns, but he refused to be swayed by their fear. He believed that it was possible to find common ground with the Comanche and that peace was worth striving for. However, the unease among the settlers grew. They began to avoid Bear, whispering behind his back and casting suspicious glances his way. Some even threatened to take matters into their own hands, vowing to drive the Comanche out of the area once and for all. One evening, as Bear was sitting on his porch, he saw a group of riders approaching the ranch. He recognized them immediately. They were some of the most vocal and prejudiced settlers in the area. They reined in their horses in front of the house, their faces grim and determined. "Mallister," one of them said, his voice harsh. "We need to talk." "Come on up," Bear replied, his voice calm and steady. The settlers dismounted and walked towards the porch. They were armed to the teeth, their rifles held loosely in their hands. "We've heard about your little powwow with White Bull," the leader said. "We want to know what's going on." "I helped a Comanche girl who was lost and starving," Bear explained. "That's all there is to it." "We don't believe you," another settler said. "You're in league with them. You're helping them plan their next raid." "That's not true," Bear said. "I would never do anything to harm my neighbors." "We don't trust you," the leader said. "We're giving you one chance to prove your loyalty. You have to help us get rid of the Comanche." "I can't do that," Bear said. "I won't participate in violence against innocent people." The settlers exchanged angry glances. "Then you're our enemy," the leader said. "We're giving you 24 hours to leave this territory. If you're still here tomorrow, we'll run you out ourselves." The settlers mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Bear alone in the darkness. He knew that he was in a dangerous situation. He had to make a decision. He could leave the territory and abandon his ranch, or he could stay and face the consequences. He thought about what he wanted to do, what decision he needed to make. It was not going to be easy. He knew what he had to do. He was going to stay. Bear spent the night preparing for the worst. He checked his weapons, made sure he had plenty of ammunition, and secured his livestock. He knew that the settlers could come at any time, and he wanted to be ready. As the sun began to rise, he heard the sound of horses approaching the ranch. He peered out the window and saw the settlers riding towards the house, their faces grim and determined. Bear took a deep breath and walked out onto the porch, his rifle held loosely in his hands. "I told you to leave," the leader said, his voice cold and menacing. "You didn't listen." "I'm not going anywhere," Bear replied, his voice calm and steady. "This is my home, and I have a right to be here." "You made your choice," the leader said. "Now you're going to pay the price." The settlers dismounted their horses and advanced towards the porch, their rifles raised. Bear raised his own rifle, prepared to defend himself. But before he could fire, he heard a shout from the distance. "Hold!" The settlers stopped in their tracks, their eyes widening with surprise. Bear looked in the direction of the shout and saw a group of Comanche warriors riding towards the ranch. They were led by Chief White Bull. The Comanche warriors reined in their horses between Bear and the settlers, their faces stern and unforgiving. "What is the meaning of this?" White Bull demanded, his voice booming across the plains. "We're here to take care of a traitor," the leader of the settlers replied. "He's been helping the Comanche." "Thaddeus Mallister is not a traitor," White Bull said. "He is a friend. He saved my daughter's life." The settlers looked at each other, confused. They had not expected this. "He's lying," one of them said. "He's just trying to protect himself." "I do not lie," White Bull said. "Thaddeus Mallister is an honorable man. He did what was right, even when it was difficult." He paused, then continued, "If you harm him, you will have to answer to me." The settlers hesitated, unsure of what to do. They knew that they could not defeat the Comanche in a fight. "We're not afraid of you," the leader said, trying to save face. "We'll deal with him later." The settlers mounted their horses and rode away, their tails between their legs. White Bull turned to Bear, his expression softening. "Are you all right, my friend?" he asked. "I'm fine," Bear replied. "Thank you for coming." "I will always protect those who are kind to my people," White Bull said. "You have proven yourself to be a true friend." He extended his hand to Bear. Bear shook it firmly. "I'm grateful for your friendship," Bear said. White Bull smiled. "We will meet again, Thaddeus Mallister," he said. "Until then, be safe." He turned his horse and rode away, followed by his warriors. Bear watched them go, feeling a sense of relief and gratitude. He had been saved by an unlikely ally. He was grateful to White Bull for his help. It was a debt that would be paid. The incident with the settlers cemented Bear's reputation as a friend to the Comanche, but also deepened the divide between him and his neighbors. He became even more isolated, but he didn't mind. He had the respect of White Bull and his people, and that was enough for him. Time passed. Seasons changed. The ranch continued to prosper, and Bear continued his solitary life, finding solace in the rhythm of the land. One day, as he was riding the range, he saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Nahima, now a young woman, riding towards him. Bear smiled. He hadn't seen her since she had left with her father. Nahima reined in her horse in front of Bear, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Bear," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It is good to see you again." "It's good to see you too, Nahima," Bear replied. "You've grown into a fine young woman." Nahima laughed. "I have come to ask you a favor," she said. "What is it?" Bear asked. "My father is ill," Nahima said. "He has a fever, and he is very weak. We need your help." Bear was concerned. He knew that White Bull was a strong and resilient man. If he was ill, it must be serious. "What can I do?" Bear asked. "We need medicine," Nahima said. "We have tried everything, but nothing seems to work. We have heard that you have knowledge of herbs and remedies. We were hoping that you could help us." Bear thought for a moment. He did have some knowledge of herbs and remedies. He had learned it from his grandmother when he was a boy. "I will do what I can," Bear said. "Take me to your father." Nahima smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Bear," she said. "You are a true friend." She led Bear to the Comanche village, which was located in a secluded valley a few miles away. When they arrived, Bear was greeted by the sight of worried faces. The entire village seemed to be in mourning. Nahima led Bear to White Bull's teepee. He found the chief lying on a bed of furs, his face pale and drawn. Bear knelt down beside White Bull and examined him. He could tell that he was seriously ill. His fever was high, and he was having trouble breathing. "I will do what I can," Bear said, "but I cannot promise anything." He spent the next few days tending to White Bull, using his knowledge of herbs and remedies to try to ease his symptoms. He made poultices, brewed teas, and massaged White Bull's body. Slowly, White Bull began to improve. His fever subsided, and his breathing became easier. After a week, he was finally strong enough to sit up and talk. "I owe you my life, Thaddeus Mallister," White Bull said, his voice weak but grateful. "You have saved me once again." "I was glad to help," Bear replied. "You are my friend." White Bull smiled. "Our friendship is stronger than ever," he said. "We are brothers now." Bear smiled back. He knew that he had forged a bond with White Bull that would never be broken. Their friendship was a testament to the power of kindness and understanding. It showed that even in the midst of conflict, it was possible to find common ground and build bridges of peace. The world was changing for the better, all because of one small act. With White Bull back to health, Bear returned to his ranch. His neighbors were still wary, but were now more respectful. The story of him saving White Bull had spread, and they knew not to mess with him. Years passed peacefully. Bear's ranch became known as a place where Comanche and settlers could meet without bloodshed. He had unintentionally created neutral ground. One spring day, a wagon train of settlers arrived, looking for a place to settle. They had heard about Bear's ranch and the peace he had brokered with Comanche. They hoped they could settle near him and be safe. Bear welcomed them and helped them find suitable land. He even introduced them to White Bull, who promised them protection as long as they respected the Comanche way of life. The settlers were grateful for Bear's help. They knew that they would not have been able to settle in this territory without him. As more and more settlers arrived, Bear's ranch became a thriving community. Comanche and settlers traded goods, shared stories, and celebrated together. It was a place of peace and understanding, a beacon of hope in a land torn apart by conflict. Bear watched it all with a sense of pride. He had never set out to change the world, but he had done just that. He had shown that kindness and compassion could bridge any divide and that peace was always possible. One evening, as he was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, Nahima came to visit him. She was now a wife and mother, her face radiant with happiness. "Bear," she said, "my father wants to thank you again for everything you have done." "I did nothing," Bear replied. "I only did what was right." "You did more than that," Nahima said. "You showed us that it is possible to live together in peace. You have changed our world." She paused, then continued, "My father wants you to know that he considers you his brother. He will always be grateful for your friendship." Bear smiled. "Tell him I said the same," he said. Nahima smiled back. "I will," she said. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Bear. "Thank you, Bear," she said. "Thank you for being you." Bear watched her go, feeling a sense of contentment wash over him. He had lived a good life, a life filled with purpose and meaning. He had made a difference in the world, and that was all that mattered. He had found a family and lived in peace. The sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the land. The air was filled with the scent of sagebrush and the sound of children laughing. It was a beautiful world, and Bear was grateful to be a part of it. A better world, a peaceful world. Bear smiled. The end? Or was it just the beginning? Only time would tell. This key point has essentially already been covered in previous responses, so I'm expanding on the thriving community aspect. The community that grew around Bear's ranch wasn't without its challenges. There were disagreements and misunderstandings, moments of tension and distrust. Old prejudices didn't simply vanish overnight. But Bear, with White Bull's quiet support, consistently fostered dialogue and understanding. He organized gatherings where settlers and Comanche could share their stories, their traditions, and their perspectives. He encouraged them to learn each other's languages and customs. He established a trading post where fair prices were offered to both groups, eliminating the exploitation that had often fueled conflict in the past. He mediated disputes, always seeking solutions that were just and equitable for everyone involved. White Bull, in turn, ensured that his warriors respected the boundaries of the settlers and that any grievances were addressed through peaceful negotiation, not violence. He understood that true peace required mutual respect and a willingness to compromise. Children from both communities played together, learning from each other and forming bonds of friendship that transcended cultural differences. They grew up in a world where cooperation and understanding were valued above all else. The success of Bear's ranch attracted attention from the outside world. Government officials and journalists came to witness the remarkable experiment in peaceful coexistence. Some were skeptical, others were cautiously optimistic, but all were impressed by what they saw. Bear received letters from people all over the country, asking for advice on how to resolve conflicts in their own communities. He always responded, sharing his simple philosophy of kindness, compassion, and respect. He never claimed to have all the answers, but he believed that if people were willing to listen to each other and to find common ground, anything was possible. Even the prejudiced settlers who had once threatened Bear began to change their minds. They saw the prosperity and security that the community enjoyed, and they realized that peace was not a sign of weakness, but a source of strength. Some even apologized to Bear for their past behavior, admitting that they had been wrong to judge him. Bear accepted their apologies with grace and forgiveness. He knew that everyone was capable of change and that it was never too late to build bridges of understanding. The legacy of Bear and White Bull lived on long after they were gone. Their community continued to thrive, serving as a shining example of what could be achieved when people were willing to put aside their differences and work together for a common goal. It was all a testament to what Bear and White Bull believed. A new way to live. As with the previous key point, this has been largely covered. This section will focus on the lasting impact of White Bull's request. Even after White Bull's passing, the spirit of his request lived on. Nehema, now a respected leader in her own right, continued to uphold the agreement. If any Comanche were in need, they knew they could turn to Bear's ranch for help. And Bear, true to his word, never turned anyone away. He provided food, shelter, and medical care to those who needed it, regardless of their background. He treated everyone with kindness and respect, always seeking to understand their situation and to find a way to help. His ranch became a symbol of hope for those who were struggling, a place where they could find refuge and support. It was a testament to the power of compassion and the importance of helping those in need. The story of Bear and White Bull was passed down through generations, becoming a legend in the region. Children grew up hearing about the brave rancher and the wise chief who had dared to defy the hatred and prejudice of their time and to build a better world. The ranch continued to thrive, even as the world around it changed. The railroad arrived, bringing new settlers and new opportunities. Towns sprang up, and the wilderness gradually gave way to civilization. But the spirit of Bear's ranch remained the same. It was still a place where people of different backgrounds could come together in peace and harmony. It was still a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and divided. One day, a group of historians came to the ranch, wanted to learn more about the story of Bear and White Bull. They interviewed the descendants of the original settlers and Comanche, listened to their stories, and studied the historical records. They wrote a book about the ranch, which became a bestseller and was translated into many languages. The story of Bear and White Bull inspired people all over the world, showing them that peace was possible, even in the most challenging circumstances. The ranch was eventually designated a National Historic Site, a place where people could come to learn about the importance of tolerance, understanding, and compassion. It was a living reminder of the legacy of Bear and White Bull, two men who had dared to dream of a better world and who had worked tirelessly to make that dream a reality. And so, the story of the ranch continued, a timeless tale of hope and inspiration that would be told for generations to come. It all started with a simple act of kindness, one that changed the world. Again, much of this has been covered. This section will emphasize specific examples of the ranch's function as a safe place and symbol of understanding. The physical layout of Bear's ranch began to reflect its unique role. He added a larger communal building, a place where both settlers and Comanche could gather for meetings, celebrations, and trade. He built separate but equal housing for families from both cultures who chose to live on the ranch. He designated certain areas as neutral ground, places where weapons were not allowed and where all were expected to treat each other with respect. These areas included the communal building, the trading post, and a small schoolhouse that he established for the children. The schoolhouse became a particularly important symbol of understanding. Children from both cultures learned together, studying not only reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also each other's history, traditions, and languages. They learned to appreciate the richness and diversity of their cultures and to see each other as human beings, not as enemies. Bear also established a council of elders, composed of respected members from both the settler and Comanche communities. The council met regularly to discuss issues of concern and to make decisions that affected the entire community. It was a forum for dialogue and compromise, a place where different perspectives could be heard and valued. Over time, the ranch developed its own unique culture, a blend of settler and Comanche traditions. They celebrated each other's holidays, shared each other's food, and learned each other's songs and dances. They created a new way of life, one that was based on respect, understanding, and cooperation. The ranch became known throughout the region as a place where peace was possible. People came from far and wide to visit, to learn, and to seek refuge. It was a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and divided. Bear never took credit for the success of the ranch. He always said that it was the result of the hard work and dedication of the people who lived there. He simply provided the space and the opportunity for them to come together and to build a better world. He believed that everyone had the potential to be kind, compassionate, and understanding. He simply tried to create a community where those qualities could flourish. And he succeeded. His ranch became a symbol of what was possible when people were willing to put aside their differences and work together for a common goal. A true safe haven, a place where all were welcome, a place where peace reigned. The story of Thaddeus, Bear, Malister, and Chief White Bull is a testament to the enduring power of human connection. It reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable differences, kindness, compassion, and understanding can pave the way for peace. It's a story that challenges us to look beyond our prejudices and to see the humanity in others. It encourages us to listen to different perspectives, to find common ground, and to work together to build a better world. It teaches us that even the smallest act of kindness can have a profound impact, rippling outwards and transforming communities and even nations. The legacy of Bear's Ranch lives on, not only as a historic site, but as a living embodiment of these values. It serves as a constant reminder that peace is possible if we are willing to choose it. The wind whispers through the tall grasses of the Texas plains, carrying the story of Bear and White Bull to all who will listen. It's a story of hope, a story of reconciliation, a story of the power of the human spirit. And as the sun sets each day, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found. Light in the hearts of those who choose kindness, light in the bonds of friendship, light in the pursuit of peace. The story of Bear and White Bull is not just a story of the past. It's a story for the present and for the future. It's a call to action, an invitation to each of us to do our part to build a more just and peaceful world. So, let us remember the lessons of Bear's Ranch. Let us choose kindness over hatred, understanding over prejudice, and peace over conflict. Let us be the change we wish to see in the world. Let's be like Bear. Let's be like White Bull. Let's build bridges, not walls. Let's create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Let us make sure no one is left behind. Let us strive for a future where peace reigns supreme. A future where the story of Bear and White Bull is not just a legend of the past, but a living reality for all. And remember, It all started with a small act of kindness.